Welcome, everyone, to Beauty and the Surgeon podcast. I'm Amy. I'm a nutritional therapy practitioner, and I'm joined today, as always, by captivating Dr. Jason Martin. He's a board-certified plastic and reconstructive surgeon. Dr. Martin, how you doing?
I'm feeling captivating today.
Yeah? That's good, because we're talking about research, and that's not always the most fascinating thing to talk about.
I'm very captivated with our research that we're talking about.
Yeah. Our episode today is Research We're Into 6.0. Now, I know that this is not the most interesting episode, people who just want to hear about plastic surgery, but I will say this. I'm going to tease it a little bit. My study does actually relate to what we do and was on humans, not animals. And it's not about nutrition.
And my study deals with living forever.
There you go. So if you would like to...
I mean, how much more interesting can this be?
Exactly. You're going to live forever, and my study is cool. So if you'd like to watch this podcast, if you're listening to it, you can find us on YouTube at Jason Martin MD, and you can find all of our social media handles right here, including our phone number, which if you listened to our last episode, you heard a voicemail because someone finally left me one again. That number is 303-630-9038. So please leave me a voicemail, like call me maybe, Carly Ridge Epson.
So one thing we did not do is wish Nils a happy birthday in the last episode. So he had his birthday. So
maybe he doesn't want to be shouted out.
No, I don't mind.
Okay, happy birthday, Nils.
he's like, oh yeah, I like it. Yep. Should we get you a hat?
Yeah.
Poppers. Confetti. Happy birthday, Nils.
Yeah.
Belated.
Happy birthday.
Because we're bad. So.
All right, we're back.
Yes.
We're back now. No more streamers.
No more streamers. Get done with the party celebration. Why don't I can't have cake, but whatever. Maybe we'll have cake in November, Nils.
There we go.
Yep. We'll have Thanksgiving cake to celebrate your birthday or donuts, because I know you like donuts.
Yeah, you're a big donut guy.
Yep. For all the podcast listeners, you want to send something to Nils, send him donuts.
I have sometimes weird thoughts about food. You've always pointed that out.
Yes.
But like donuts to me, like I'll eat a pizza and be fine, but donuts to me are way too extravagant.
You know,
like,
what the really funny...
why do I think like that? You know, it's not like a pizza probably has just as many calories.
Well, let's take a look at let's say Dunkin' Donuts. A donut is probably the least caloric option you can get from them. Far less calories than the croissants, than the breakfast sandwiches, than the muffins. I mean, a donut has like half the calories of a muffin.
So I didn't know this.
Yes. So, a donut in isolation, I think, is totally fine. And I think if Nils wants some birthday donuts, donut that up.
You go, Nils.
Yes.
Get your donut on.
Get your donut on. Get your donut on.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, why not? I blow out the candle, donut candles. Yeah. All right. We digress.
All right.
Always. Happy birthday, Nils.
Thank you.
We have 4 viewers left after that.
And they are ready to hear about how they're going to live forever and whatever.
No, I want to sell this because my presentation.
Well, yeah, let's get to yours. Dr. Martin's research is first.
So my article is from David Sinclair's group out of Harvard. David Sinclair is a very well-known person. He's dealing with longevity. He's a bench researcher. He's not an MD. And some of his comments frustrate me because he says MD stuff that I don't agree with. But what the work he's doing on longevity is truly amazing. He had a study that was released recently in the Journal of Aging, volume 15, which was pretty remarkable.
You want to say the title, so if people want to look it up, they can.
Okay. It's chemically induced reprogramming to reverse cellular aging. And by definition, what that means is, can you reverse this aging process with chemicals alone? And why is that important, Amy? Up to this point, we've shown that we can reverse some aging processes, maybe not in humans. Actually, there's a few human studies, and I'll get to that. But it's mostly been with viral vectors, right? You've understood that, where you inject viruses into places and they work and do something. For example, I think David Sinclair did some studies with people with vision loss. It might have been
not in people, but they did do it in animal
models. It was animal models, yeah.
Yep.
And they did a viral vector injection into the retinal axons, and you had some changes and improvements in restored vision.
The side effect is blindness if it doesn't work. So don't inject stuff into your eyes. These studies were in animals.
Right. I think he actually has human studies, but I have to look at that. I don't know for sure. Anyways, this studied basically what he has shown, and what a lot of people have shown, Amy, what is the real cause of aging? I know that's hard to sum up. What is one of the main issues that happens with aging? And it's the favorite word you love.
Oh, you mean epigenetic? But I would not consider that the main cause of aging.
Okay, well, that's one of the causes.
I would say, to me, the main cause of aging is the lack of cellular energy. Like your cells
Right.
start replicating incorrectly.
Right.
It slows down and eventually stops.
Right. And I agree with you 100%. That's the in-stream effect.
Like the epigenetics is the expression of the cell.
No, I understand, but at least what they've shown is that the epigenetic changes over your lifespan will lead to senescent cells.
Right.
Then
The expression of the cell.
Right. And then it leads to the less energy production and all that kind of stuff. And Amy, you're so much better at describing things. Because I thought about this when I was in the shower, and I was like, I can't even think of an example. How would you describe the difference between our DNA, which is the blueprint of our body, and the epigenetic structure, which also affects DNA in the way that we do things, way that we make proteins and live our lives and support our bodies and stuff like that?
Very easy, actually.
Okay.
So your DNA is the blueprint, right? So you're building a house, you have a blueprint.
Yeah.
The epigenetics is what happens with that blueprint, essentially. So you may have, let's say the house, says, or a recipe. You have a recipe and it says to use chicken breast. Well, you don't have chicken breast, you have chicken thighs. Well, so you make the recipe, you just use chicken thighs. Maybe that's better. Maybe that recipe tastes a lot better. And you keep doing it with chicken thighs, and that is an epigenetic change. The negative change would be like, let's say you are trying to build a house and it says to, pour concrete and you don't have it.
And use sand.
You use sand, so that cell, that house collapses.
Right.
So that's a negative epigenetic thing. So there are these are things that impact the way a cell builds itself and rebuilds itself.
And functions and all that kind of stuff. And from a science standpoint, the way that I know epigenetics is you have a DNA strand, this double helix. Watson and Crick, they came up with this in the 50s or 60s. And then the way that that folds on itself in a further dimension around is the way that gets expressed. And that folding of that DNA and all the stuff that goes along with that also has rules and guidance and ways that you're supposed to do that. And over time, with all the crap that we expose our bodies to, that folding gets disrupted. Once that folding gets disrupted, that's when you see the development of senescence, like in a large scale in your body. Senescence or senescent cells are basically like Nils's Jeep Grand Cherokee that he had before he got the new one. When the car gets older, the AC breaks down, the wheels aren't that great, your axle's not. What were some of the problems you had?
Yeah, it was the struts.
The struts. Yeah.
A lot of
So it's still a car. It still works, but it just doesn't work great. And then in some cases, it just stops working altogether. So that's what senescence is. And in reality, that's what aging is. You get an accumulation of these senescent cells. Now, Amy, who's brilliant, has told us many ways that we can improve that situation with something called autophagy. And she herself tried some of these things. So, Amy, what are some of the things you have done? I'm going to get to the end of this. I know it's your life.
Okay. Fasting is probably the main one. And then also some, autophagy agents, essentially specific types of supplementation that can encourage autophagy.
Right. We talked about sirtuin pathways. I've taken resveratrol.
Pterostilbene is one that I've taken.
Yep. We've talked about
Fisetin.
metformin, Amy's favorite, berberine, which I'm yet to see anywhere. But she loves it.
I have it in my office. I've given it to you a number of times. You have many bottles of berberine at your house.
I have it at home.
Yep.
So that's the idea, is that you want to reverse these senescent cells. You want to take Nils's old beat-up Jeep and turn it into the new one he owns now. Now, can you do that just by fasting or berberine or metformin? No. The idea is to have chemicals that go in there and actually reverse senescence. They rejuvenate, restore that cell to that youthful cell. That's the difference. And that's the future. And that's how you live for a long time. But Amy, what is the main problem with taking a senescent cell and making it young again? What could that lead to?
Oh, really bad things. Cancer is probably the biggest one.
Cancer is the main thing.
Extremely rapid growth of cancer.
There is a reason why viral infections can secondarily lead to cancers. Just look up HPV and esophageal cancer, right? Once they replicate and they turn these, sticky cells into replicating cells, that by definition is cancer. So that's what they're studying.
Well, and also youthfulness, as we all know, is a period of rapid growth. So if you are reprogramming cells to a very young state, anything that's growing oddly is now going to grow very rapidly, very oddly.
Mm-hmm. And what if you have a cancer in your body and you don't know it? And then you take some of these chemicals that stimulate, youthfulness that somehow lead to overgrowth. Mm-hmm. So it's a complicated thing, and by no means are we anywhere near an answer on this. And it's funny because even though David Sinclair is very well respected, he's at Harvard. On Twitter, he was saying, he's basically like, I've cured aging, no, you haven't.
In yeast.
Yeah, no. So this study looked at the induction of these rejuvenating pathways. There's something called Yamanaka factors, which must be like genes.
Well, Yamanaka, he won the
Nobel Prize?
Yeah, for discovering autophagy, essentially.
Yeah. So like there's certain genes or factors that you can stimulate or induce that reverse or that cause autophagy and rejuvenate the cells. He looked at human fibroblasts. So this is an in vivo study on human fibroblasts. They first started, actually, it was so interesting, Amy. They got 3 donors. One was young, one was older, and one had progeria. Do you know what progeria is? So that's that disease people get. And I remember being young and seeing it like when I was real young, where someone's like 14 and they look like 60.
Oh, that's what that is. Yeah.
So they age rapidly.
Yep. The opposite of Benjamin Button.
Right. And that really wasn't suitable. So they got bigger fibroblast cell lines, and they had ones that were youthful or regular and ones that were senescent. Okay. But specifically, supposedly the way they did this, the senescent ones would not replicate. Don't ask me how.
Well, there's zombie cells.
No, it wasn't that. It was the way that they did their medium and et cetera, et cetera.
So the extracellular matrix would
something
prevent them
complicated. Yeah, but they guaranteed that it would not replicate, right? So you wouldn't have a cancer situation. And they developed this novel assay. They call it the NCC system. Don't even worry about it. But like in the cytoplasm, which is what, Amy? The stuff
inside the cell.
Inside the cell,
jelly.
that things float around. And they have this test with fluorescence that they could see if you see a lot of these glowing dots inside the cell. This is so rudimentary what I'm saying right now. Then that would be more indicative of senescence. What they were, these glowing dots were separated more apart. That's a more youthful cell. That's basically, and that's what was so key about this. What was interesting, they found out they created this assay that they could real time tell you if this was an old cell or a young cell, real time, immediately almost. And so then they could apply chemicals to these cell lines and see immediately if these, 60% of this, these cells were senescent beforehand, now only 20% are. And they could see the reversal right in front of their eyes. They only applied these chemicals for some amount of hours, 4 hours, or checked it at 4 days. And they were actually able to show that they could stimulate the Yamanaka factor, specifically OSK, and they could cause senescent cells to return to their more youthful state.
Very cool.
Yeah. Why this is interesting is that this is the future. Could you imagine AI creating peptides, which they do already? Mm-hmm. And they're going to come up with these novel structures, and then you can go into these assays, either in the AI world or in the real world, and you could test it against these human fibroblasts, and you could find compounds that legitimately will return senescent cells to their youthful state without causing cancer. Clearly, retroviral treatments or taking viruses and attaching genes to them is probably not the cheapest option, right? We could barely even tolerate, COVID vaccines and mRNA vaccines. So like the idea that you're using live viruses and injecting it into your body, I just don't think anyone's going for that anymore. And that's something historically, I remember being in biology class learning about that. I mean, that was 30 years ago. So this is kind of new era. We're not going to be probably using viral vectors for everything. The fact that you could use a chemical, one of them they talked about was valproic acid. Amy, do you know that one? Mm-mm. That's for seizures. Okay. So maybe people taking seizure medications are going to live forever. Who knows? So how that gets distributed, how it gets to all the areas of your body that you want, and the vectors of delivery. So I mean, it's all up in the air, but it was very, very interesting. So just to make sure I cover everything, the parameters we talked about the study design, we talked about the outcome, and the limitations are that this is an in vivo study. Amy, what's wrong with in vivo studies versus, no, what's wrong with, this is an in vitro study, excuse me. What's wrong with an in vitro study versus an in vivo study?
Well, because in isolation, things don't always function the same way they do in the complete system of the body. Like you said, they've altered these cells to not replicate or to not replicate abnormally. I mean, like
they didn't alter the cells. There's something that did around it where it wouldn't. Yeah, I get you.
So they have isolated a cell and done treatments directly on it, which takes it out of the actual. Bodies don't function that way.
Right.
At least they were using human cells and not
Yeah.
animal models. So I mean, that's a good thing. Yeah.
And so really what this study showed is that we're still a long way off from living forever.
True knowledge is knowing that you know nothing.
And it may not be in our lifetimes. You know what would really suck if we were the last generation of people that couldn't live a long time.
Yeah. I mean, somebody's going
or
to
that
be.
could live a long, you know what I'm saying?
But didn't.
Like if we're like by the time we're 80, they're like, oh, by the way, everyone who's 79 and younger can take this pill and you're going to live for 40 more years. Yeah. But these 80-year-olds, I'm sorry, you're too senescent.
But think about what the damage that would cause to the planet, essentially, and the ecosystem.
That's what I was going to say. As soon as we figure it out, we'll be wiped out by global warming.
Yeah.
I mean, we can't support that type. I mean, unfortunately, there's our planet's ability to accommodate people living forever is also not realistic. So we got to figure that out at the same time. Where are we going to put all these forever living people?
Yeah, the ethical parts of this, the philosophical parts, and everything with longevity,
and the financial component.
The financial component, everything goes along with it. Yeah.
So if you're rich, you live forever. If you're poor, you die.
Affluent.
Gattaca. I have told you this for years. Gattaca is happening.
Yeah. So I do think that this is like one of those rare times in science where it has to be a cultural, a country, a governmental. It's going to have everyone has their input, but
they'd have to be able to support that. That's my point. The infrastructure
there's ways
is not
to do
there.
it. I read articles on this. There's ways to do it. I'm not sure it could be done with the state of our world, but like I'm saying, there's ways to do this. There's ways to be efficient. There's ways to grow foods. There's ways to use AI and robots and all this kind of stuff. You could change the future with technology enough to where you could support a lot more people. But will that happen? There's ways that you can develop housing. Right? There's a paint that just came out that absorbs like 50% of all the sun's energy, right? And doesn't reflect it. So that alone, you just put that paint everywhere in the city, you can lower the base temperature like a degree. There's so many different things coming out. By the way,
and they're all free.
None of it's free.
Yeah.
We can't even get our roads redone. What am I talking about? We're going to paint everything white.
The infrastructure here is so intense.
I mean, if you take Elon Musk for at face value, but like I think he does believe in energy and renewable energy. So he had this tweet. He showed this area in Africa wasn't very big, and he said this is the area it would take for us to put solar panels to give as much energy we would need like for the Earth. So it's not that we can't do it. It's that can we do it?
Political will.
Right. Yeah. Also, I think no matter what, if you just take that out of it and say you don't live any longer, but you have a more healthy body, that's the key. So obviously, okay, think about this real quick. Why do we think we just get older and things happen and that's why we get other diseases, high cholesterol, well, that's not a good one, high blood pressure, diabetes, all this kind of stuff. Some of that is because of this process going on of senescence and the cells not functioning well. It is. Mm-hmm. Why do people...
Well, it's diabetes. Pancreas stops functioning.
Yeah. So the idea is that you would rejuvenate these cells and they would start functioning like they did when you were a kid.
So this is still Gattaca. So basically you make people healthy until the day they die. They just have a pre-programmed date of death. Amy solves this. I have just fixed this solution. I have made the solution. We have.
So I think what we're saying is Dr. Martin wants everyone to live, and Amy just prefers you just to go away when you're 60 and go
Not
die
60.
in a bush somewhere.
No, like maybe like 140. You know.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. At some point, we got to cut this off. Like it's
Dude,
been a good
at
ride.
140, do you imagine if we're still doing the podcast then? No.
Ooh, yeah.
But if we have this same body, like your point being, like if we could maintain the healthness.
Right.
The healthness. That's a new word. I've created healthness.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's my study.
Cool.
Okay.
Not bad.
No, it's good. I mean, I think I agree with you on your kind of overall feeling about David Sinclair and this type of research is that it's fascinating, but does it really have a lot of practical application at the moment? No.
This is the first thing he's done that I think has a practical application because legitimately he created an assay, which is the novel part. I mean, it's all he did, which is create an assay. Then those factors were already known. But he created an assay that on real time can tell you if something is working or not. And then now you can go through very quickly and just test all these chemicals. They didn't have that before in a controlled in vitro setting.
Very cool.
Cool.
All right. We're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to come back to my human research study.
Boring.
All right, we're back. So I think everyone's going to be shocked to find out that my research article is not about nutrition. It's not about a supplement. It's not about any type of dietary intervention, but it is about exercise. So this was in Scientific Reports.
I'm just shocked. I'm shocked you did one on exercise.
Right. The name of this article is Resistance Training Rejuvenates Aging Skin by Reducing Circulating Inflammatory Factors and Enhancing Dermal Extracellular Matrices.
This goes absolutely against what we said on our Tummy Tuck myth episode that exercise will tighten your skin.
Well, it does not tighten your skin.
Okay.
Per se.
All right. Gotcha.
Rejuvenates aging skin is what it says. This does not say anything about tightening. Correct. So this was a really cool study. It actually was done in 2019, but it was just released, I think, in June. So it's in the journal Nature. So if you go nature.com, you'll find this article. It was really cool because it was done on actual humans. So this was done on Japanese women, middle-aged women. I think they defined middle age as like 41 to 55 or something. So, these were women who were untrained. So they were sedentary. They did no type of exercise. They had them not change anything in their diet or their skincare routine, and they were not allowed to do any additional exercise other than what was prescribed in this program. So they took these 61 women, 5 dropped out. And of course, I was super fascinated to see if they dropped out of the weight training arm or the aerobic training arm, because it was 2 different arms. So they did aerobic training and weight training. So 4 dropped out of the weight training, and the 1 dropped out of the cardio.
Oh, that's too bad. I wish it would have been the reverse.
But they start out with more. So in the end, they actually had more women enrolled in the resistance training arm had 30 and the other one had 29.
Okay.
So, no, they had 29 to begin with. So they lost a couple. So they were at 26. So because they were only 56 in the end. So 56 in the end, they started with 61. So what they did was they took the women, broke them into 2 groups, and they did all these tests ahead of time. So they did some really cool tests on the thickness of the skin. So they were looking at skin on the cheek. So they not only, looked at the skin with all the cool things like your dermatologist might have, looked at the amount of skin damage you have, looked at the thickness of the dermis, which we've talked about in our episode about skincare treatments, I think, where we show like cool pictures of the breakdowns of the layers of the dermis of the skin.
That's what all the reps show us when they drop off devices here. Look how much the dermis is thicker.
Yeah. So one of the things
it's like a micron.
Yeah, that happens as we age, though, is that our skin loses elasticity. Those come from the fibroblasts. It loses its plumpness from the collagen.
It's a lot thinner.
And it thins out, so that thinness of the skin is what contributes a lot to fine lines and wrinkles. And also, the droopiness is not, this didn't really talk about that. But I mean, when we look at things in plastic surgery, obviously we're looking at the underneath of the skin as well. But the texture of the actual skin itself, I mean, if somebody has really thinned out skin, you can make it look better by doing surgery where you improve the tensile. You're pulling on it, you're making it more tense. But it never looks as good as somebody who has better skin integrity or better skin quality. So that's why I found this really fascinating. So it was really cool. They took the women twice a week. They either did exercise on a bike or they did a pretty cool, I'm going to read you what they had because of course.
Do you think it was like the Japanese version of Peloton?
It was the one thing I really appreciate about this study.
It was like super electronic,
It was an
and
electronic
it had
bike.
anime characters on the bike and stuff. I mean, is that
because it's a
stereotypical?
Japanese study? Like it had really stringent guidelines.
Of course, yes.
And adherence. So I thought this was so cool. So
I absolutely love Japan. I love the culture. I love the people, and I love how OCD they are. It just makes me so happy.
Well, then this study it was very pleasing to read for that reason.
Right.
Like it was very pleasing to my OCD.
Thank you for
being
in this world, Japan.
Yeah. So they, the women on the bike, they would have them come in, they'd warm up, and then they'd have them work out at 65 to 70% of their peak heart rate, essentially adjusted for the load. And then they'd have a 3-minute cool down. They monitored them through every workout. So making sure that they were like increasing or, staying at that heart rate percentage, which as you train and you get better at something, it takes more effort essentially to get your heart rate up to that same level. So they made sure that they weren't like plateauing, I guess, on the cardio or on the resistance training.
Because peak heart rate is 65% is like 100 beats per minute, right? I mean, what is that?
I mean, it depends on the person.
I know, but it's not. They're not going crazy.
No, they weren't. They weren't going super high, but they did improve their VO2 max over the course of the study. So these women on the athletic training arm did increase their VO2 max, which is kind of a marker of how much load you can take or how hard you can work for how long, which was really cool. The weight training, I was, of course, more interested in that to see like what they did. So they had them come in, they did a little bit of warm up on the bike, and then they did percentages of their maximum load essentially throughout leg curl, leg extension, arm curl, a rowing exercise, shoulder press, and chest press. So they made sure that they kept increasing it over the course of these weeks. So they had a personal trainer there who would increase it by 5% load from the previous week. They let them rest in between, and then they made sure that they were reaching their target, essentially like output, by increasing the load, which was really cool. So they really did have them train well.
So what was the duration?
It was 16 weeks.
Do you think the Japanese ladies were all yoked up at the end of it? Like they had big deltoid caps and
well, they did actually.
Shoulder.
So the women in the resistance training did, of course, increase their 1 rep max on everything, and they did increase their lean body mass.
That's awesome.
As well. The women in the athletic, what they called the athletic or the aerobic training, the aerobic training, like I said, increased their VO2 max and also decreased their body weight and BMI over the course of the 16 weeks. And again, these are women who were untrained. They called them sedentary. They did no exercise leading up to this. And they also said that they were not allowed to do any additional exercise during it. They had them track their diet the whole time. They told them not to change it, but they did monitor their diet to make sure that there were no dietary changes that would have any impact on the skin. Because as we've talked about in so many of our episodes, your diet is fundamental to how your skin is. Like what you put in, you see on the outside. So if these women all of a sudden started like taking in tons more protein or were doing collagen supplements, like they wanted to make sure that there was no other way to explain the changes in the skin, no changes in skincare. Like they actually had to send in pictures of all the things they ate and then have an interaction with a dietitian.
Man, we just have whatever university in Japan did this.
It was so complex. I loved it. It was, like I said, it was so good. They covered everything.
How did they even organize this? They had like this big Gantt chart, It was probably like 20 people planning it out.
Well, I mean, it gets even deeper than that. Yeah. So when you really get into the specifics of the study, they looked at like over 1,400 individual hormones, chemokines, inflammatory factors. I mean, it was unbelievable. And this is why it took years.
Did they do skin biopsies?
They did.
The core biopsies? Yep.
So the one main thing, though, that they found that was really interesting was they focused a lot on, again, this extracellular matrix. And why is that? That's because that's what brings all these nutrients to the skin. Mm-hmm. I mean, our skin, it has to essentially be fed by something. And it's this extracellular matrix that's kind of bringing in either negative things, right, inflammatory factors, or bringing in nutrients.
Extracellular matrix is also where hyaluronic acid lives. Mm-hmm. And that's the injections we do, like the dermal fillers. So it's where all the action is for most of these cells besides energy production and replication.
Yeah. So at the end of the study, both groups saw an improvement, which was really cool. So they both saw an improvement in like the flexibility and the strength of their skin essentially, but only the resistance training arm saw an improvement in the thickness of the skin, which is, again, what we want to see for healthy aging, like the skin that's thicker, which I know sounds counterintuitive, but like you want your skin to be thick and robust. It has more tensile strength. It's going to age better.
Yeah, kind of like your wrinkles. Skin, Amy. You have thick and robust skin.
I have very pale skin, so I try to keep it. Yes.
It's transparent but thick.
Right, you can see right through it. See my veins straight through it.
Bulletproof glass.
Yes, right, bulletproof glass. There you go, Nils. So, and you think about it. Why would this be the case? Then they tried to find out what was happening in this extracellular matrix that would kind of contribute to why skin that was put, of the weight training versus the aerobic training, why would there be this difference in the thickening of the skin? So they did find some things. There was a suppression of inflammatory factors. They found that in both groups, that there was a suppression of some of these leukotrienes or cytokines that kind of cause inflammation. They also, though, found in the resistance trains group that there was a downregulation of a specific hormone, essentially, that causes this thinned out appearance of skin. So they, of course, ran this through their thousands of other tests and are trying to figure out exactly why, which they don't totally know why this happens. So the outcome of this study was that it's really cool, but there is more research needed. It was only 61 participants, only 56 completed the study. So obviously much more research is needed in more broad population. But when you think about what weight training does, our bodies are not, they're all connected. It's one big thing. Our skin is wrapping everything.
You call it an organ.
It is an organ.
Yes.
Yeah, it's functioning. And this study does prove that, that these it is functioning in everything in the body. The even inflammation, everything is kind of contributing. Our hormones, all of these things are having an impact on how our skin actually is, the thickness of our skin.
Right.
In just 16 weeks, they saw this improvement. I mean, that's pretty remarkable. But when you lift weights and you're putting tension on the muscles and the bones, that tension is also translating to the skin. When you put tension, when you put like mechanical load on something, just like a muscle, it gets bigger, thickens, by response to that tensile load. So you got to think the skin is the same way. But they were measuring it in the face. And these women were not doing exercises of the face.
That's crazy.
So that's where they took the samples, was on the cheek. So you see this across that's what I mean about the skin being connected all the way. So like you might think like, oh, well, I don't need to lift weights because I don't care if the skin on my, arms or legs looks good, because these women, as I said, they did arm and leg exercises. They weren't doing any exercises for their face, but that's where they were taking the skin from, and that's where they saw the improvement.
So interesting. They did it in the face. I wonder what they did. I mean, did they do it like near the hairline?
They did it on the cheek.
What?
Yep. I mean, who knows what they consider the cheek, but I mean, you could do a little core biopsy on a cheek and be just fine, right? And so they looked at it. I mean, it was so cool. I mean, I found this just so fascinating, and it does just show that like the things you do to make yourself healthier have an impact. And the women in the
impacts on things you don't even think about.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, you have to think about studies. There's genetic variability. You're taking all Japanese women, Asian descent.
And not that many.
Right.
Yep.
They already look good anyways, so their skin quality is way better than maybe just like.
But it improved from baseline.
No, I understand.
Yeah.
I understand. That's so interesting.
Yeah.
I think also if you like always take a macro look at all, like whatever the study's looking at, like I think we all know that people that lift weights look better than people that like are super skinny and do super cardio.
Absolutely.
Super skinny and super cardio people have looser skin. We see it all the time in Colorado. And they just don't look as good as a gestalt. And I don't mean that meanly or critically. I'm just telling you that's the truth. And why is that? Well, some of it's body composition, but the other part, I mean, their skin quality in general, in our experience, the cohort we're looking at, it looks better.
Yeah. And
so there's some element there that's probably not just body contour.
Right. And the aerobic training group did see some improvement in their skin. Like they did see an improvement in the amount of collagen essentially that was in this extracellular matrix. So more nutrients were getting to the skin.
Right.
It just didn't translate to the improvement in the thickening of the skin.
Totally.
So their skin quality was, in some ways it was improved by just doing exercise, that increase in blood flow.
I think from a static standpoint, if you come from a position where you're not exercising at all, I'm sure everyone's gonna have some improvement.
Right, to the skin.
But like the question is what's actually occurring at the skin. It's so weird.
And that's what they studied. That's what they really were trying to look at, is what actually, and I'm telling you, they have 1,400 different things they were looking at, chemical substances in the body, which is, again, the bodies are so freaking amazing that there's that much going on.
1,400 probably is just like nothing.
That's nothing. I mean, that was like for this small study.
No, I mean, it's like in the real world, like there's like whatever. You'd have to look at a million different things.
Right.
Yeah.
So I love these things, though. To me, the practical application of this is that resistance training is a net positive for skin aging.
Yeah, you look better.
Yes, that you'll look
so
better.
You look better and your skin's better.
Yeah.
So it's a better times two. It's better squared.
Exactly. I mean, who knows how, these women had across the board. I mean, they measured so many things. I mean, again, this study was designed so well. Like, I loved it. Reading it made me just so happy.
You have all these like toned Japanese women walking around now with like perfect skin.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you really.
If I ever go there and I run into one of these ladies, I know you. You lifting weights? You lifting weights?
Right. You were in the skin study. You were in the resistance training, rejuvenates aging skin by reducing circulating inflammatory factors.
I know what arm of the study you were in.
You were in the resistance training arm. But even, I mean, like I said, I'm not trying to hate on aerobic activity. I mean, both is good. And I think it shows that getting more blood flow going throughout your body is positive.
Increasing your heart rate has like huge benefits. And hormonally speaking, especially for middle-aged people, hormones are changing and then stimulating your, this blood flow itself is good. Hormesis is good. Mm-hmm. And then also, especially on the weightlifting part of it, I'm sure there's some hormonal differences because you stimulate muscle growth. That definitely has positive effects on your sex hormones. Yeah. And they've shown that too. So I think this is a really interesting study. Good job. Yeah, I thought this one was super cool. So nice job. I was really happy to find one that was on people. I had actually initially picked an article. Brett Contreras actually just came out with some new research on hip thrust versus squats, which has been, the ongoing debate for years in the hip thrust world. But this one I just thought was so much more, what we do. It really applies to what we do. So, I love it. Good job. So squat ladies,
for your skin.
I'm kind of feeling your study more than mine. I will say that David Sinclair is a bench researcher at Harvard, but he does have proprietary companies. One of them is Inside Tracker. So you always need to be very aware of these science people that also have
a financial stake in the game.
Interest. And Inside Tracker is really cool, but it's very expensive. So I think we have to take everything with a grain of salt. But he does come from one of the most prestigious universities in our country that has, ethical guidelines and stuff like that. So
and he's really passionate about what he does.
Oh, he loves it. Yeah, I love him. I love listening to him.
Well, he's got that cool Australian accent.
The story I always tell that Amy and I, we joke about, so resveratrol, I think it was resveratrol. He has like pure resveratrol that he was using in one of his studies, like literally some powder. And he said, I took it home and I just have it at home and my dad and I put it in our tea. And I'm like, you just took it from the lab? From the lab, it's. But his dad's apparently like low 80s and super healthy and doing really well, in which he was not always that way. So some of these things that he's implementing his dad in his life has made a big difference. But if there's anything that Amy and I would agree on, if you can get resistance training in your life, that's going to be rejuvenating to you in many
or anything
different ways.
That's getting your heart rate up, gets blood flowing. Those things have a net positive in helping your body, flush these inflammatory factors, kind of clean house. I think the same thing. I mean, I would be fascinated actually to see if they did the same study, but they did aerobic training, resistance training, and then sauna therapy. And see if the people just doing sauna therapy had any improvement in their skin.
Yeah, so Atia just had something like that. He was talking about there's a preponderance of data now really that these sauna therapies have a legitimate effect. Mm-hmm. It's not just ancillary or noise, They were always kind of like not sure. Obviously, you have things like heat shock proteins and stuff like that, but the reality of sauna therapies in general, and I was looking at this, it didn't say wet or dry, but I'm assuming it's this heat that he feels now with all the data he's looked at that it has a legitimate place and it really does have a medicinal effect.
Oh, I agree.
True effect.
Yep, for cardioprotective benefit. Yeah. But I would be that to me if I could design, if the Japanese researchers are listening and would like to make a study even more perfect in my mind, add in a sauna arm and see how their skin looks after 16 weeks of twice a week sauna therapy.
I tell you, the ladies that weren't exercising before would love to be in the sauna arm. Like, you eat whatever you want and just get in the sauna. That sounds pretty darn good.
Yeah, change nothing, just sauna.
That sounds like a fun weekend.
Yeah.
Okay.
So thank you everyone so much for listening. I know these episodes can be kind of dry, but we really do love research. And I think what this really shows is that there's so much out there and our bodies are really amazing and complex and aging is multifactorial. Just surgery alone is not the solution.
No.
There's a lot more to it.
And we're telling you that. Mm-hmm. So
lift weights.
Listen to us, people.
Yep.
Listeners, listen. And the other part of this we will tell you is that, as you age or go through life or at any point in your life, it's about empowering yourself. And it's not just one thing. I mean, clearly, as Amy is kind of alluding to, it's a lot of different things. You have to take a little bit from here, a little bit from there, and really put it in. And surgery is the same way. We do this all the time in surgery. So that's why we're so attracted to this stuff. We're into the transformation business, but you just can't do it with surgery alone.
Yeah, we want to know the why too. How the body works is so cool.
And then also the answers, right? Like if you could tell could tell someone like, hey, we can tighten your skin with this tummy tuck, and afterwards you start weightlifting, it's going to make it even better. That's kind of a stretch, but you get what I'm saying. Well, actually, I would say that.
It's not going to make it worse. I guarantee you that.
What am I talking about? I actually do say that.
All
right.
I would absolutely say that.
Alrighty.
All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone. If you made it this far in the episode, leave us a pulley emoji. Pulley it out. Someone actually has in the past, and I was so excited to see it. I'm like, oh my gosh, there's a pulley emoji.
We don't want any more crying emojis. Section. We want polling emojis.
Pulley emojis. So you can find all of our social media handles here. You can find us everywhere on social media at Beauty and the Surgeon Podcast and also at Jason Martin, MD. Leave me a voicemail because I love them. 303-630-9038. And we will see you here next time.
We're going to go celebrate Nils' birthday in his new Jeep Grand Cherokee.
With a donut. With a candle.
See you later.